Good evening. Welcome to the Village of Los Ranchos de Albuquerque's Board of Trustees regular meeting. Conference through Zoom, streamed on the village website and Facebook. The date is June 9th, 2021. The time is 7 p.m. I am now going to call the meeting to order. It is 7 p.m. The Village of Los Ranchos de Albuquerque will be conducting this live meeting via Zoom video conferencing and streaming on its website and Facebook page, as I have said. I'm going to call the roll at this time. Trustee Rael.
Here.
Trustee Lewis.
Present.
Trustee Pacheco.
Present.
Trustee Riccabini is not going to be on the call. At least I haven't seen him, and he told us he wouldn't be. So he is excused. Thank you. Item 3 is the approval of the agenda. I need a motion to approve the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
I need a second.
I second.
I'm going to call for the question. I'm going to call for the roll call vote. Trustee Ryell,
Yes.
Trustee Lewis,
Yes.
Trustee Pacheco,
Yes.
Trustee Riccobeni is excused. We now move to the public comment period. Participants may address the Board of Trustees to comment on issues, problems, or successes on topics that do not appear elsewhere on the agenda. Submitted written comments that were sent to the clerk prior to the meeting will now be read. Danielle, did we receive any written comments ahead of time?
Good evening, Mayor and Trustees. I did not receive any written comments.
Thank you. Participants wishing to speak that did not register will now be given an opportunity to speak. I understand that Mr. Joe Craig may be on the line to speak. Is that correct, Danielle or Kiko?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I had him as listed as, oh, there he is. Let me let him in. He just joined. Stand by.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, Joe Craig has joined the meeting.
Joe, please state your name and address for the record and then give us your comments.
Thank you, Mayor. Joe Craig, 505 Calle del Pajarito Northwest. I have a question for you, Mayor, and the trustees as well. I've seen I'm not sure if it's deliberate, but we seem to be undermining our agricultural initiative in the village of Los Ranchos. I spent this afternoon looking at some of our greenhouses, 97 degrees, so it was seriously hot out there. But we have the BOT talking about greenhouses and want to investigate them. Our CSA with Sarah Cobb got beat up at our commission meeting. Our vineyards, and I won't go any further into that, are getting beat up as well. And we've outlawed hemp in our village. You know, I mean, I have a real question for you, Mayor, and the trustees as well, is what are we doing with our agricultural initiative? I'm spending a lot of time, ton of time really, helping the village to buy open space, agricultural space. We're hiring a new agricultural manager. I haven't seen any of the trustees out and around. I don't know what you guys are planning on doing. We have an election coming up, so you know, I think this would be a very apt time to discuss what we're doing in the village and moving forward. I have a number of other things I'd like to talk to you, but we're short on time, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Joe, you've asked some interesting questions and it does merit a response, and we will try to get you an answer fairly soon. The trustees, of course, can weigh in at any point in time on how they feel, but you're asking some serious questions. So we're going to move on. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak that did not register prior to the meeting? If so, please use the raise your hand button. We will call on each individual one at a time.
Mr. Mayor, trustees, I have no hands raised.
Thank you. We're going to move on to item 5 now, presentations. Mr. Eric Harrigan, who I believe is on the line, Managing Director, RBC Capital Markets, Bonding Capacity Overview and Refunding Opportunities of Outstanding Debt. Can you unmute Mr. Harrigan?
Good evening, Mayor, Trustees, Eric Harrigan with RBC Capital Markets.
Please give us your address, Eric, and then go into your presentation.
Sure, it is 10043 Los Cansados Road Northwest, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 87114.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to talk to you this evening. I understand that somebody with the village will be sharing my presentation. There it is.
Yes.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the village's bonding capacity through gross receipts tax and general obligation bonds, as well as to also talk about a potential refunding of the village's outstanding general obligation bonds for interest rate savings. So if we could go to the first couple of slides there that entitled Overview of Gross Receipts Tax Bonds. Just kind of a pretty kind of high level overview. So gross receipts tax bonds are revenue bonds that are secured by and typically paid from one or multiple increments of gross receipts taxes. And they're typically, used for general governmental purposes. They can often be used for economic development, roads, other public infrastructure that will, help bring additional gross receipts tax revenue to the local municipality. There's a lot of flexibility in how long you can issue gross receipts tax bonds. And gross receipts tax bonds don't need voter approval prior to issuance. And that's because the revenue stream that's used to pay those bonds is already in place and paid by the businesses within the village. GRT bonds are the most common form of debt issued by municipalities here in New Mexico, and that's typical for the rest of the country. And currently, the village has no gross receipts tax debt outstanding. Now, it's important to know that while there's typically sufficient pledged revenues, or what we call legal capacity, to pledge to the payment of debt, the practical capacity can be different. And what I mean by practical capacity is what is the amount of revenue that the village actually has to pay debt on bonds. And that can either be done through the imposition of new gross receipts taxes, or it can be done with using other sources that the village has available to it to pay the debt service. For example, in looking at the village's audited financials over the last couple of years, the village, probably the largest expenditure that the village has in its general fund is capital improvements. And so that could potentially be if you're going to issue bonds for capital improvements, that might reduce the amount of pay-as-you-go debt that you need on an annual basis. So that could be an alternative or a way that the village could pay debt service on gross receipts tax bonds. Go on to the next slide, please. So we took a look at the village's historical gross receipts tax collections going all the way back to 2018. In 2018, it was essentially flat growth from 2017. In 2019, the village saw just a little over 3.5% growth in its gross receipts tax revenue. This is not uncommon to what we saw in surrounding communities, such as the city of Albuquerque and the city of Rio Rancho. It's pretty consistent with what we saw, with what those communities saw in 2019. Going on to 2020, of course, halfway through 2020, we were embroiled in the pandemic. If we could go to the next slide, please. And you'll see that beginning in April of 2020, that's where you could really start to see where the pandemic began to impact the village's gross receipts tax revenues. However, for the fiscal year, the village actually was slightly up over 2019. And again, this is not uncommon to what we saw from surrounding communities. 2020 started out as a very, very strong year. And then that got tapered back because of the pandemic. But looking, going into 2021, currently the village's gross receipts tax is down about 15% year to date. And again, that's fairly representative of what we were seeing. And, the FY 2019 activity is probably, closer to reality as we start to kind of come out of this pandemic and people start to kind of resume their typical spending habits. Next slide, please. So we looked at what the village's capacity is, what the village is authorized under state law to impose, what the village has imposed. And as you may be aware, a couple of years ago, the legislature de-earmarked several increments of municipal gross receipts tax, the infrastructure gross receipts tax, hold harmless, capital outlay gross receipts tax. That was all wrapped into just one single municipal gross receipts tax increment. And so villages or any municipality in the state has the total taxing authority of up to 2.5% through its municipal gross receipts tax. And currently the village has 1 1/8 imposed. And the annual revenue for 2020 was a little over 1.4 million. So under that change in law, that gave municipalities the ability to impose up to 2.05% municipal gross receipts tax without an election, and anything over that, up to 2.5%, would require an election. And so the village has the ability to impose up to 0.925% gross receipts tax. That would generate about 1.1 million without an election, and has the also the option to impose up to 0.45% with an election. That would generate about 555,000. So in total, the village has about 1.6 to 1.7 million in potential revenue from gross receipts taxes that it could impose or generate if the village so wanted. We just wanted to kind of provide this as for informational purposes. And we ran the same analysis based upon your year-to-date 2021. Again, it's probably really not realistic of what as things kind of start getting back to normal, but we wanted to at least provide the information for you. So going on to the next slide, we ran a couple of scenarios of how much various increments of gross receipts tax, either existing or new. We don't really focus on that. We're just focused on a specific increment. And we looked at 1/4%, 1/2%, and 3/4% as just to provide some options. We can run additional analyses if the village so desires. But 1/4% municipal gross receipts tax equates to approximately $308,000 of revenue. And that would support a bond issue size of about $4.3 million. And this assumes a 20-year financing. 20 years is typical for most municipalities for gross receipts tax bonds. We also looked at 1/2%, so essentially double the revenue, which is also going to double the net proceeds. So 1/2%, which is a little over $600,000. Generates net proceeds of about 8.6 million for projects. Again, this assumes a 20-year financing. And then the last scenario which we ran, which was the 3/4%, that generates about 925,000, or equates to about 925,000 in annual revenue. net proceeds of about 13 million for projects, and again, a 20 million, 20-year final payment. So we assumed, we were very conservative in our assumptions. We assumed, based upon all these scenarios, that the borrowing rate would be 3.5%. Given the current market today, you'd be looking at rates closer to 2.5%. So that those net proceeds would go up a little bit, but we are, it appears that we're facing a bit of an inflationary, point right now. Things are costing more, rates have come off of their lows from August of last year. So we wanted to be conservative on our assumptions when providing, the capacity to the village. So that brings me to the end of the gross receipts tax portion of this. What I might do is I might stop there and just see if there are any questions that you have on this section. I would be happy to answer them, or I could go on to the next section.
So Eric, what we normally do is ask questions at the end of the presentation, and I would
Sure.
prefer to do that unless the trustees want to jump in right now. I think it's okay to continue, and we'll ask all of the questions at the end of your presentation. Thank you, Eric.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. I will continue. So the next section is general obligation bonds. Going on to the next slide, please. So general obligation bonds are bonds that are secured by a property tax mill levy rate that's placed on all property, residential and non-residential, within the municipality. GO bonds do require voter approval prior to issuing the debt. And for municipalities and counties, the total amount of general obligation bonds that can be outstanding at the time of issuance is capped at 4% of your assessed valuation. And your assessed valuation, or net taxable value, which is the more technical term, is 1/3 of assessor's value, and the assessor's value is, roughly equates market value. Not always, because the assessor is capped at 3% growth on existing homes without any new construction or the sale of that home. So sometimes they don't necessarily match up, but the goal is to try to be as close to market value as possible. And currently, the village has one general obligation bond outstanding, which is the 2007 bonds. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation, but those bonds are currently callable and they can be refunded at lower interest rates. And you can reduce your interest cost, similar in a way to kind of, refinancing your home, as an example. So the village has additional capacity to issue general obligation bonds and with voter approval. However, currently any new issuance of GO bonds would result in a property tax increase. So on the next couple of slides, we'll sort of talk about what your capacity is. And then we've also run a few, capacity scenarios and sort of what that impact is. So in looking at your assessed value, the village has had very consistent, strong growth over the last 5 years. You've averaged almost 4% growth in your tax base over the last several years, which is very good. And that is consistent with, actually might be slightly better than what the city of Albuquerque has done. I think it's a little slightly better than the growth rate in Rio Rancho. But when you look at your total capacity, so 4% of your assessed valuation, so for the tax year 2020, which is the current fiscal year that we're in, the total amount of general obligation bonds that the village can have outstanding is 11.7 million. And currently the village has 2 million outstanding, and that gives you capacity of just a little over 9.7 million. But currently the village is only 17% bonded to capacity. Going on to the next slide. So it's important to note that there are all kinds of governmental entities that levy property taxes for property owners within the village. The village is just one component of that. The village does not have an operating mill levy, but does have a debt service tax rate. But you can see here that the state of New Mexico, the county, the village, the school, and that should be APS, CNM, MAFCA, and then there's the UNM hospital. They all levy various increments, which are either operational or debt service or capital mill levies, as is the case with Albuquerque Public Schools. But your tax rate, your total tax rate for a residential property owner has stayed relatively flat from about $32.23 to $32.60 for this current year. So it's been very stable. So if you go over to the next page, we'll take a look at your current bond. So right now the village maintains the geo bond rate at 1 mil, and that is either through sufficient growth in your property tax base or through contributions from the village. But right now projecting your tax rate out, and again, this is not taking into consideration any funds that the village contributes or any over collection. Your 2007 bonds will fully pay off in 2027, and your interest rates run anywhere between 4.4% and 4.6%, and your tax rate is going to be right around that 1 mil levy. And we just wanted to kind of outline this, before going into talk a little bit about your various capacities. So going on to the next slide on page 12. So we ran a $9.7 million geo bond issue. This is sort of your maximum capacity, if you will. So you can kind of get an idea of what, if you borrow to your maximum rate, what would it look like? And we borrowed for 20 years. And the tax impact or the tax increase would be approximately $1.81, and that's per thousand of assessed value. And so we've provided this chart over on the right to kind of give you an idea of what does that translate to a home value. And so for home value of 100,000. The tax impact would be about $60 a year. And for a $500,000 home, that tax impact would be around 300. That would be around 300. So that kind of gives you an idea of sort of what your max capacity is, what that tax rate, and this is just assuming, level debt service. And so this is for just illustrative purposes only, and just to give you an idea of what that tax impact would be like. So on the following page, if we go to page 13, on this scenario, we looked at trying to level your tax rate out so that you'll have, essentially, if you were to issue new debt, your tax rate would stay level for the remainder of the term. It does allow the village to shorten the debt up. The tax rate is a little bit lower at $1.50. Again, this would be issuing up to capacity, 9.7 million. And you can see what the tax impact to various home values, ranging from $50 for a $100,000 home, all the way up to $250 for a $500,000 home. And then going on to the next slide, scenario 3. So we looked at what would the tax impact be if we just went half of what your capacity is, which is 4.5 million. And that tax rate increase would be about 83 cents. For a $100,000 home value, it'd be about $27 a year. For a home value of 500,000, we'd be looking at about $138 a year, just to give you an idea of what that tax impact is. Going on to the next section, we're going to look at your existing general obligation bonds and look at, what if the village were to refund these bonds and lower the interest cost? How much savings could the village generate? So, as we mentioned, the village has the 2007 bonds, which are outstanding. The bonds are currently callable. The rates range from 4.4% to 4.6%. And if we go to the next page, on page 17, refunding of the bonds generates about $170,000 in present value savings on an annual basis. This is about $25,000 to $30,000 roughly. And then on a PV percentage basis, it's about 8.4%. And that's really the number that we look at and focus on. So when you're looking at and evaluating whether or not a refunding makes sense, does it make economic sense to go through this process, is to achieve present value savings of 3% or greater. And this refunding would generate about more than double, almost triple the minimum requirement of 3%. And that savings, of course, is coming from replacing your 4.4 to 4.6% debt with interest rate of about 0.77%. Now, I do want to mention that this refunding and the savings that we're showing here, this is the true net benefit to the village. This this includes any costs associated with doing the refinancing. This is the true savings to the village. Again, we have been conservative in our interest rate assumptions. If the village were to price this bond issue today, those savings would actually be a little bit higher than what we're showing you today. So on page 18, we have, not that we are anticipating that the village to do the refunding, but we wanted to at least just provide a time schedule of what a financing schedule might look like for a refunding. And we would certainly recommend going through the New Mexico Finance Authority. It would provide the village with the lowest overall interest cost. The Finance Authority has a process that it goes through. But if the village wanted to pursue something like this, you could move forward with the refunding, and the refunding would close in and around the late August timeframe. And that's when the new debt service that's when the new debt payments would then start and be available. And that's when the village would begin to start realizing the interest savings. Next slide, please. So I have a number of slides on the market. I'm gonna just keep my comments here, pretty brief. But on page 20 of the presentation, there are, of course, a number of things that are going on at the national level that have the potential to impact interest rates. And of course, that is the stimulus plan. The American Rescue Plan Act was approved in the amount of $1.9 trillion earlier this year. Right now, the Congress is debating a $1.7 trillion infrastructure plan, as well as another potential $1.8 trillion America's Families Plan. And that's a lot of money that's going to be coming into the economy. And people are trying to understand, well, what is this impact going to have on inflation and the cost of goods? And we're all seeing the cost of goods, construction, cost of goods at the supermarket going up. How much of that is stimulus and how much of that is supply chain issues, remains to be seen. But if we could go ahead and just skip to page 24 of the presentation, there's some more slides in here. And you're welcome to, view those at your leisure. But for the sake of time this evening, I wanted to just cover this slide. And this gives you an idea of what interest rates, tax exempt interest rates, have done over the last 10 years, and more importantly, what has happened this last year. Interest rates hit an all-time historical low in August of last year. Rates have come up since that point in time. But when you look at where interest rates have been historically, rates are still very, very low compared to where they were even 2 years ago or even a year ago. And so with that, that brings my presentation to a conclusion, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So Eric, thank you. Thank you very much. This is really interesting and quite dramatic. I'm going to ask, are there any comments or questions from the governing body? What we're going to do is have each trustee ask their questions before moving on to the next. Trustee Rael.
I have no questions.
Trustee Lewis.
Yes, thank you. First, I was interested on gross receipts tax. You can still, if you are instituting a bond, it's going to be less than you need to take to the voters, but you can still take those to the voters. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Mayor and Trustee Lewis, that's correct. I mean, you know, it really is dependent upon what the village's, you know, ordinance requires. So you can take a bond issue, I believe, to the voters if you wanted to, but you don't have to.
Okay.
And that's really up to, you know, the trustees' discretions.
Okay. And my next question was, so we have general obligation bonds that we're talking about refunding. Is it possible to replace those with gross receipts tax bonds, or do they have to be rolled to new general obligation bonds?
That's a good question. So without kind of overstepping onto the legal side of things, I think technically you could replace general obligation bonds with gross receipts tax bonds. Of course, the village would then assume 100% of that debt on, you know, through gross receipts tax revenues, and the property tax rate would go away. I think that's possible. I have not seen that. I have not seen that before, so I can't say for certain that it is possible.
So is there more cost to it, or time consuming energy that has to go into it from y'all's standpoint?
From our standpoint, no. There may be some bond counsel, so legal bond counsel would have to review it. But, you know, from a timing standpoint, whether it's a gross receipts tax refunding or a geo bond refunding, it doesn't impact the timing greatly at all.
And are rates the same, pretty much?
The rates would be the same. If going through the New Mexico Finance Authority, again, which I would recommend, would be the same regardless of which security you use.
Okay. Eric, thank you very much. It's been a very helpful presentation.
You're welcome.
Hey, Trustee Pacheco.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric, for the presentation, and bear with me. I'm not super familiar with all of this, but I do have a question with regard to the GRT bonds. Is there a benefit to not spreading it out over 20 years? And can you shorten that time frame?
Yes, so Mayor and Trustee Pacheco, absolutely you can. So so the benefit of shortening the debt is lower interest cost and lower interest payment over that time. The downside, if you will, is that it comes with higher annual debt payments.
Okay. Okay. I think that was the only question I had right now. I'm sure there's going to be more later for sure. Thank you.
Trustee Lewis has another question. Go ahead, Trustee Lewis.
So either one of these, do they have prepayment penalties?
So great question. So Mayor and Trustee Lewis. So generally speaking, when you issue municipal bonds, it comes with a 10-year period where you cannot call the bonds, and then any period after that you can call without cost. There are such things as what are called advance refundings, where you can refund it before the call date. You have to put the money in an escrow at a bank. But there's no penalty to do that. The penalty is the difference between what you can invest the escrow at and what the interest rate on the bonds is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we do have a question from the audience.
Eric, could I,
Go ahead, Trustee Rael.
Eric, thanks for the presentation. A question is, can we have Go bonds as well as the gross receipt tax bonds at the same time? Is that possible, or is that not normally the way it's done?
So, Mayor and Trustee Rael, yes, you can. And in fact, that's been done in other communities where a portion of a project is paid from GO bonds and another portion of the project is paid from gross receipts tax bonds. It's not common, but it certainly is possible. So yes, you can. Again, there is a timing, there would be a timing gap because GO bonds do require voter approval prior to issuance.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we do have a question from the audience. I understand Joe Craig has a question. Kiko, can you unmute Joe so he can ask his question?
Thank you. Mayor, trustees?
Yes.
Thank you. Joe Craig, 505 Calle del Pajarito. I'm president of the Friends of Los Ranchos. And I want to remind at least a couple of our trustees, I think Trustee Rael and you were, Mayor, were a trustee at the time. The Friends of Los Ranchos led the effort for about 2 years for this property tax bond that we're discussing and the expansion of it. And that was for open space. And we promised the voters that it would be for open space. I'm yet to hear any thing in the governing body about what this money is going to be used for. And we certainly would like to understand any, certainly, reduction in the rates would be good, but any expansion for other projects, I think would need a serious discussion in the trustees and in the village that voted for this first ever property tax. Thank you.
So Joe, you bring up a great point, and I want to make sure that everybody on this call understands that one of the large projects that we are talking about is in fact open space. So we are well aware of that. We do have another large project looming at us, and that's the 4th Street finalization, the last 1.7 miles of 4th Street. And the cost of that's liable to be between 10 and $15 million. Our goal is to get as much state and federal money, but we may not be able to get it all. And so there is a way, I believe, to use GRT bonds anyway, to perhaps give us the total funding that we need to absolutely finish the project. I think the trustees and everybody in the village can understand that the cost of construction is going up so fast that the longer we wait to finish that project, it's going to cost perhaps even far more than what we estimate today or even early next year. So that's the purpose of all of this. Eric, thank you very much. And this has been a great presentation.
Mayor.
So yes, go ahead.
I need to respond to Joe's question or concern. Just so you know, Mr. Craig, that as far as I'm concerned, I would never consider using the money that we have gotten on the 1% that we had taxes on property for anything other than open space. So I would not vote for anything that other than that.
Thank you, Trustee Rael. So Eric, we'll be in touch with you about further steps, okay?
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's been great talking with you. Really a lot of great questions.
Thank you. With that, we're going to move on to item 6, which is the consent agenda. There will be no separate discussion of these items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. A and B. We're going to handle both of these together. The minutes of the April 30th, 2021 budget workshop / working session and the minutes of the May 12th, 2021 regular meeting. I need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I need a second.
Second,
Any discussion? I'm going to call for the question, call for the roll call vote. Trustee Rael,
yes.
Trustee Lewis,
Yes.
Trustee Pacheco,
Yes.
Trustee Riccobeni is excused. We will now move on to item 7, departmental reports. The mayor's report, the administrator's report, the Agri-Nature Center manager report, the planning and zoning director's report, project manager's report, and the public safety liaison report. The departmental reports are included in the packet and reflect activities for the period listed in each report. If the governing body has questions for staff regarding the reports, we will have each trustee ask all of their questions before we move on to the next trustee. Trustee Rael.
All I have is some corrections. Would you like those now, or
Yes, please.
if we go to the to page 55 of 136, which is the Agri-Nature Center report,
Okay,
referring to Dr. Lombard. In the
yes,
last- That is, Dr. Lombard's name is misspelled.
okay,
And if we go to Maria Rinaldi's report on Agri-Nature Center improvements on page 59 of 136,
okay,
second paragraph where it says we are received should be we have received.
okay,
Also on Maria's report on page 60 under roadway improvements, the first paragraph it has misspelled Los Ranchos.
okay.
And if we go to page under financial business, you want me to do that now?
Let's do it during the cash report.
Okay, we'll
Can
do
we?
that then. All right, that's fine.
Okay, are you done, Trustee Rael?
So I have,
Okay, Trustee Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor. First, in Administrator Simon's report, page 55, I just wanted to point out the workshop on growing healthy soil together. I really want to emphasize that that's I think, a very awesome workshop for the village. And I would like to just highlight that and make people additionally aware of it. My next question is for Maria Rinaldi. Good evening, Maria.
Good evening.
My question's on the Village Center project and what exactly it means when you said Palindrome was unsuccessful in the application for tax credits. Where do we go from there?
Mayor, Trustee Lewis, it is our understanding that there is another round of potential financing through MFA in late summer, I believe, and that Palindrome is looking at combining the multifamily with the senior housing as a package to attempt to secure funding through that mechanism. The same tax credit, but it would include the multifamily. And I do believe that he's also looking at other federal possibilities for financing to create a level of affordability, a reasonable level of affordability in the project. But at this point, the ball is in his court and we're waiting to hear what his plan is and what he is intending to pursue.
Does that have an impact on our timetable at this time, or is it too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell. We should have, I know that Anne is in communication with him on a pretty regular basis. And I think as summer approaches that we'll have a better idea of how there may or may not be an impact in the schedule.
Okay, thank you, Maria.
Certainly.
My last question is for Fred. Is Fred out there?
Yes. Hi, Fred.
Or good evening, not good morning.
Hi, Fred. I was in your report for, well, several of the months. I was just curious, when you put a number of disturbances, what does disturbances include?
Disturbance can be a loud party. It can be, a neighbor dispute, those types of things. And they just break it down by disturbance. They normally do not break it down any further than that. But it could be a loud party. It could just be a neighbor dispute or disturbance, noise disturbance, that type of stuff.
Okay, I saw that it almost doubled from March to April, and I was just curious
Yeah.
what was included in that. So thank you very much, Fred.
And Mayor and Trustee Lewis, one of the things that we're really starting to see as we come out of COVID, I'm not going to say people are wild, but I think people are getting out now, and I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of those types of calls, not only in the village, but honestly nationwide on that type of stuff, at least through the summer anyway.
I tend to agree with you. Thank you, Fred. That's all my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Trustee Lewis. Trustee Pacheco. You're muted.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Thank you, Mayor. First question is for Administrator Simon. Hi, Ann, how are you?
Great, thank you.
Good. So I'm on page 53, facilities and parks. You talk about the infiltrators that were installed. I was just curious, did we get any other complaints after the big storm of any other, ponding issues or anything like that?
Mayor, Trustee Pacheco, thank you so much for the question. We were really impressed with how well those infiltrators on Calle del Pajarito worked. We are installing a couple more on Garduño now because of the efficacy of those. Now we're looking at other spots, as you say, other ponding areas, and we have identified about 4 or 5 of them. I'm sure there's more because it's the valley. But one of the big ones is on Schulte, right in front of the Taft School. So we plan on tackling that area as one of our first projects in the new fiscal year. And then we have a couple others throughout the village, but that's what the crew is doing after the rainstorms. They're going around and looking to see where we're seeing ponding.
And were there a lot of complaints from residents after the storm?
We really didn't get any complaints.
Good. Okay, wonderful. Second question regards to the pickleball courts. And I don't know if we've talked about this or not before, but are there any plans for signage?
Mayor, Trustee Pacheco, there is a sign on the court. It currently says that it is the Los Ranchos basketball and pickleball court.
Is it on the fencing? I didn't see it.
It is on the fencing on the outside of the court, right on Green Valley, just to the end of the old village hall.
Okay, I need to look a little closer, obviously. Thank you. Okay, the next question is with regard to, and I'm on page 54 now, the business and economic development. It looks like Lavender Festival is a go, which is awesome. I think it would be great if we have time, and I'm not sure that we will for the next meeting, but maybe to hear a little bit more about what that's going to entail. I'm curious, is there going to be wine booths again? Is kind of what, I'm sure it's going to be scaled down some, but just kind of curious as to what that's going to include.
Mayor and Trustee Pacheco, I'm happy to outline some of the events that are scheduled right now, if now is a good time, Mayor.
I think it is.
So let me just outline. No, the Lavender in the Village Committee has been doing a fantastic job They have, because of the limitations on gatherings when the festival was being planned, they opted away from a large event at the Agri-Nature Center, and they went for several smaller curated events. So there will be a tea at Los Poblanos, which is a ticketed event. There will be a wine pairing, cider and beer and wine pairing with lavender edibles at Steelbender. There will be a lavender pottery painting class and things like that throughout the month of July. Now that we can gather in larger numbers, the committee has decided, sort of last minute, but it's coming together quickly, to have one in-person large market. And that will be at the barn on Saturday, July 25th, with a smaller ticketed evening event on the 24th at the barn with music. So it's very exciting, lots of things throughout the village. And then of course our passport program is allowing any village business that wants to participate can post promotions, and 25 businesses have already signed up to be part of the passport program.
That's wonderful. Glad to hear it's back. And it kind of seems like it's going back to its roots. I remember way back when we did a dance at the park. And
Oh, yeah.
so it's wonderful that we're going full circle. Thank you, Anne, appreciate it. Let's see, my next question is for Planner Justice. Good evening, Tiffany, how are you?
Good.
I am now on page 56. And I see that you're finalizing the pilot project ordinance. Just kind of curious where that is at this point and what the process looks like moving forward.
Right. So Mayor, Trustee Pacheco, trustees, the approach for this pilot project ordinance, it's actually kind of similar to the process that we did for the short-term rentals, where we will present to the trustees a policy document with some questions for some pretty large decisions. And then once we have kind of some guidance for that, drafting an ordinance to put before you all. And so at this point, what we plan on taking to you for next month is going to be that policy document with those larger questions.
Okay, so the draft policy will come before the board next month?
No. So the plan is to have, I guess, it's basically like a background proposal document. It will not have necessarily ordinance language in it. It won't be formatted like an ordinance, but there are some questions that I'm working on now with drafting the ordinance that I would like the trustees' guidance on before we draft that ordinance language. Things like for cluster housing specifically, how much open space and what kinds of open space and density bonuses, if any.
Okay, so then once that's done and we kind of go through that and provide input, the following month will be the draft ordinance, potentially?
Either the following month or the month after. I think it will depend on, I guess, the feedback that we receive. If we have like a solid direction from the trustees on some of these questions, then we can be drafting those.
Okay, so looking more like a August, September timeframe to kind of get this wrapped up.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Trustee Lewis asked my question to Maria, so I think that's it, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Pacheco. Trustee Riccobeni is excused. We now move to item 8, which is financial business, discussion and approval of the cash report for May 2021. Treasurer Will Fisher, please present the report.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So before you is the cash report for May 31st, 2021, with an ending cash balance of $6,992,200.34, which is an increase of $154,855.27 for the month, with year-to-date excess of revenues over expenditures of $1,813,927.58. And for that, wraps it up. There's some unusual and significant activity for you to review. And I guess we're open to any questions, but Miss Tammy is out, so I'll try to fumble through what little I know.
Well, let's do it this way. Tammy, of course, has asked the trustees to give her email questions that she can respond to because she has laryngitis. She has trouble speaking. I spoke to her on the phone about 5:30 this evening. So I think what I'd like to do is have a motion, a second, and have some discussion. And then if the trustees want to go ahead and ask Tammy questions via email, that would probably be the best approach. Is that okay with everybody?
Yes.
Okay, I need a motion.
I move approval.
Second,
I second.
is there any discussion?
I have,
Go ahead, trustee Ryle.
first thing, it's not a question for Tammy. I think our administrator can answer it.
Okay,
It has to do with the Law Enforcement Protection Fund that's listed here on page 64.
okay,
The memorandum of understanding with public safety services for $18,873 to Bernalillo County. It says for repairs and upgrades to the Ranger. And the question is this the Ranger that the one we bought for BCSO some years ago?
perhaps Fred might know.
Mayor, trustee Rao, yes, that's some upgrades to that Ranger that the village did purchase, yes.
And is that still worth that much? That we're putting 18.
Yes, it is.
Because it's several years old. It seems like it's, well, if it's worth it to you, I mean, you're the experts, and I'll leave it at that. I have another question though. More actually, it's a correction on the check voucher on page 105, where it says $99.25 to Amelia Cardenas, 2 hours translation services. The word translations is misspelled, and that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Rael. With that, is there any other discussion before I call for the question? I'm going to call for the question, call for the roll call vote. Trustee Rael,
Yes.
trustee Lewis,
Yes.
trustee Pacheco,
Yes.
trustee Riccobeni is excused. Okay, we're now going to move to item 9, public hearings. There are none. Item 10, old business. There is none. Announcements. There is none. We now move to item 12, new business. A, discussion and approval of resolution number 2021-06-01, a resolution notifying the Bernalillo County Clerk of the at-large positions to be filled for the Village of Los Ranchos de Albuquerque for the 2021 regular local election to be held on Tuesday, November the 22nd, 2021. Danielle, please present the resolution.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and trustees. Presented before you is resolution number 2021-06-01. This resolution is required of all local governments to notify their county clerk of all positions to be filled at the next regular local election. The resolution is stating that the Village of Los Ranchos will have on the ballot the following at-large positions: 2 open positions for trustee for a 4-year term and 1 open position for municipal judge, also for a 4-year term. Key information regarding filing dates along with times and locations are also listed on the resolution. Early voting will begin on October 5th and end on October 30th. Election day will be taking place on Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. As in 2019, there were 2 polling sites in the village, one located at Los Ranchos Villa, one at Taylor Middle School, and although outside of the village, yet nearby, a site at Valley High School. With polling sites established throughout Bernalillo County, this allows voters the flexibility to cast their vote anywhere in the county. Elected candidates will take office, on January 1st, 2022. This notification, provided as a resolution, is required to be given to the county clerk between the dates of June 5th and July 5th in accordance with NMSA 1978 1-22-4A. If this resolution is approved, I will submit it to the Bernalillo County Clerk, who will then notify the Secretary of State of the village's intention. As we move closer to the election, key dates and information will be updated on the election page of the village website and in the Village Vision magazine. The action item before you is asking for your approval of resolution number 2021-06-01. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Danielle. Before we get discussion, if there is any, I need a motion.
I'll make a
the
motion.
approval.
Oh.
Go ahead, Sandra.
Sorry. I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 2021-06-01.
Thank you, trustee Pacheco. I need a second.
I second.
Now, is there any discussion from the governing body? Okay, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter? If so, please use the raise your hand button.
Mr. Mayor, trustees, there are no hands raised.
Thank you. I'm going to call for the question, call for the roll call vote. Trustee Rael,
Yes.
trustee Lewis,
Yes.
trustee Pacheco,
Yes.
trustee Riccabini is excused. We're now going to move to item B. Notice of award of request for proposals, RFP number 2021-04-00, Information Technology Services, parentheses IT, authorizing the mayor to begin contract negotiation between the Village of Los Ranchos de Albuquerque with the following firm, My IT Support. Danielle, please present the brief.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and trustees, on pages 112 and 113 of your packet, you will find a brief synopsis of RFP number 2021-04-00, a request for proposals for information technology services. In Administrator Simon's report included in the April board packet, she announced that the village would be releasing the RFP for these services. The village's intent was to select one firm to provide IT services for all village-owned platforms. The RFP was issued on Monday, April 26th, and closed the end of the business day on Friday, May 14th. The dates of publications and the method of advertisement are listed on your summary sheet in the packet. The RFP was posted on the village website for accessibility during the open period, as well as hard copies made available for pickup at Village Hall. The village received 4 proposals. The firms are listed on your sheet in alphabetical order. On Tuesday, May 18, 2021, the 4-person committee met, evaluated, and scored the firms based on the criteria listed in the RFP. The rating tabulation sheet is attached and is on page 114 of the packet. The scoring is based on the RFP evaluation criteria listed on pages 21 through 23 of the RFP. The committee recommended the following firm, My IT Support. The village would like to thank all the firms for their time and effort in submitting professional proposals. The action item before you is requesting your approval to authorize the mayor to begin contract negotiations with the selected firm. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Danielle. Before we get into any discussion, if there is any, I need a motion.
I move approval of RFP 2021-04-00.
I need a second.
A second.
Is there any discussion from the governing body? Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter? If so, please use the raise your hand button.
Mayor, trustees, there are no hands raised.
Therefore, I'm going to call for the question. Call for the roll call vote. Trustee Rael,
Yes.
trustee Lewis,
Yes.
trustee Pacheco,
Yes.
trustee Riccobeni is excused. Okay, item C, discussion and approval to adopt ordinance number 277, an ordinance allowing short-term rentals, amending and adding definitions, amending a condition of use of the guest house, amending bed and breakfast establishment conditions of approval, establishing revocation procedures, and establishing an effective date. Director Justice, please present to the board the ordinance number 277.
Mayor, trustees, this ordinance is the same that was presented to you last month for advertisement. The only changes are what I'm going to go over tonight. And so we did make some revisions between the advertisement and the version of the ordinance that's before you tonight. The changes are on page 122. This is for the revocation process. And so we did have some concerns from our public safety liaison, Fred Radosevich, about the revocation at municipal court. So we discussed with legal and determined that the easiest way to revoke a license with violations is to send out 3 notices of violation. And once those 3 notices have been delivered and documented, that the license is automatically revoked. And so this would be done by the department as a director decision that the license holder could appeal to the Planning and Zoning Commission to overturn that decision. And so there's also just a couple things that I would like to amend if you choose to adopt this ordinance tonight. Would be this ordinance with the following revisions. Under C, revocation, subsection 2, subsection A, in the first paragraph, so 3rd line, citation actually should be changed to violation. And subsection paragraph B, at the last sentence, the word citation should be violation. And so the reason for this error here is we do have citations in our code, and those do go to the municipal court. So we wanted to be clear that though it's a violation of our ordinances, this is not a citation going to municipal court. This is a notice of violation. After 3 violations, the license would be revoked. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director Justice. Before we get to discussion and questions, I do need a motion.
I move approval of ordinance number 277.
I need a second.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or questions from the governing body? Okay. Is there anyone from, go ahead.
Sorry, trustees, could I just, would it be possible to amend the motion to approval with the corrections that I stated?
Yes, I move approval for ordinance number 277 to include the changes as they brought up tonight.
Thank you. And the second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, I'll ask one more time. Any other questions from the governing body? Okay. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter? If so, please use the raise your hand button.
Mayor, trustees, there is somebody who wishes to speak. Stand by.
Okay.
Camille Varos, you should be able to talk.
Camille, please state your name and address.
I did that, but could you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Say it again.
Okay, Camille Vados, 427 El Paraíso
Okay,
Road in Los Ranchos.
go ahead.
And I guess this is the first time I've been able to even address any of the items that may have been discussed and approved prior in reference to short-term rentals or guest houses. I was granted a permit for a guest house, and it is almost complete. So is there any amendments to conditional uses of the guest house? And if so, could those be defined or outlined tonight?
Well, let me see if Director Justice understands your question. Director Justice, do you understand the question?
Yes. And so I will mention, just for the trustees' sake, this is correct. This is a change that's on page 118 of the packet. Ms. Varos, so the change to the guest house conditions of use, the conditional use, the conditions of approval, all of them are the same, except we are making one change to one of the third provision. The original is that occupants shall not be charged rent unless an explicit conditional use allowing rental has been approved by the commission. We are now amending that to say that occupants shall not be charged rent unless an explicit conditional use allowing rental has been approved by the commission, or rent is for only short-term rental, as all are part of a permitted bed and breakfast. So the conditions of your conditional use for the guest house are pretty much the same. The only difference is now you have the opportunity with the bed and breakfast permit to include that as all are part of a bed and breakfast establishment.
Under the definition of a guest house, or with the new provision for if it was permitted under a guest house, it could be amended for consideration for a bed and breakfast. Did I understand that right?
So Ms. Varos, there's no changes to the definition of a guest house. The only difference now is that if you apply for a bed and breakfast permit, you can include the guest house as part of your application for a bed and breakfast. But it won't automatically be part of a bed and breakfast unless you apply.
And unless it's applied. I understand, and thank you.
Any further questions, Camille?
No.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else from the public wishing to speak on this matter? If so, please use the raise your hand button.
Mayor, trustees, there are no hands raised.
I'm going to call for the question, call for the roll call vote. Trustee Rael,
Yes.
Trustee Lewis,
Yes.
Trustee Pacheco,
Yes.
Trustee Riccobeni is excused. We're going to move to item D, discussion and approval of resolution number 2021-06-02, adopting and setting a cap on total number of bed and breakfast short-term rental permits available to be issued in the village of Los Ranchos to Albuquerque. Director Justice, please present the resolution.
Mayor, trustees, so this resolution is referenced in the short-term rental ordinance earlier in the packet. This essentially says that we will have a cap on the total number of allowed bed and breakfast permits in Los Ranchos. That cap, of course, can be raised or lowered by resolution by the board. And we're setting the initial cap at 78 permits, which is 3% of our estimated households of 2,600. So the reasoning for that is that just based on the proposals that we received from companies for that would aid in code enforcement, they identified 30 to 40 existing short-term rentals in Los Ranchos. So assuming that all of those were permitted, we wanted to make sure that we would allow some new players to the game to be able to get their permit before we reached our cap. And I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director Justice. Before we get to discussion and questions, I need a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 2021-06-02.
I'll
I need a
second.
second. Thank you. Okay, is there any discussion or questions from the governing body?
Yes, I have some discussion.
Go ahead, Trustee Lewis.
I'm not comfortable with the 78 number. If we have 30 or 40 that they're identifying at this time, I would like to propose a change to this amendment, saying that it would be 2.5% or 65 permits. And my reasoning there is that, there's a reason you have a cap. 65 would be roughly 50% more, over 50% more than what we think we have at this time. And I'm concerned. I feel like once this genie's out of the bottle, this is something very new that we're addressing. And I feel like once this genie's out of the bottle, it's very hard to put it back. I think if you go to start with 78, it's going to be very hard to take it back. And so I would personally like to see us start with a lower number, because I think it'll always be easier to raise the cap than to lower it. And I think there's a reason for having a cap. And I think we need to find out who all comes forward with this new ordinance and what that number looks like before we start setting the number any higher. So my proposal would be to use, base it on 2.5% of our households, which would be a cap of 65.
So do the other trustees have any questions or suggestions and perhaps want to amend the motion or not?
Mayor,
Yes,
I agree with Trustee Lewis. I think it's hard to go down, after you set something. I think that keeping it at that 2.5% is a good starting point. And again, we can amend this moving forward. So I
Right.
think let's give it a go, at a lower percentage and see how the village does. So can I go ahead and amend
yes, you
at
can.
this point, my motion? So I
Mayor?
would amend the
Mayor, trustees?
motion. I'm sorry?
Is somebody trying to talk?
Yes, this is Danielle. We have
Yes,
an
Danielle.
attendee by the name of Camille Barros who would like to address the board again before you.
Well, we'll
go
do
on.
that after the motion in the second. And before we actually vote. Go ahead, Trustee Pacheco.
Okay, I'd like to amend resolution number 2021-06-02 to include the suggestion by Trustee Lewis to lower the rate of permits given to 2.5% or 65 permits.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion from the governing body? Okay, now we know that we have someone from the public that wants to speak. Camille Varoz, please state your name again and address and give us your comment.
Could you hear me, Camille Vados?
Yes, yes.
426 El Paraíso Road in Los Ranchos. And my question is, has there been an assessment of existing short-term rentals? Because in my neighborhood, I've been, and I don't know if there's any criteria as to what short-term rentals would be dictated as, because even in my own neighborhood, there's all these trailers going up, being bought that are on property, and I know they're being used. And, I don't know if they're charging or if they're Airbnbs. I know we do have an Airbnb in our neighborhood, which I didn't even know. Are we looking at at those situations. So as you put caps on, there may be even more than you even have that you're aware of, where people are just renting. And
Okay, thank you very much. Did you want to address that, Director Justice? Do you have any opinion on that?
Yes. So Ms. Faros, to answer some of your questions, so the village has not done an assessment of existing short-term rentals. However, we have received assessments from a couple of code enforcement companies that identify short-term rentals. They basically look at online listings from a variety of different platforms and hosting sites, and they identify which ones are in our jurisdiction. So even though we haven't done the assessment, we do have basically the addresses and information for existing operations. This includes Airbnbs, this includes VRBOs, anyone who's like listing their dwelling for lodging on these websites. And those would all fall under our new bed and breakfast permit. It is essentially for short-term rentals like Airbnbs. And with that, we would not consider trailers to be dwellings for rental. Similarly, we don't consider trailers and RVs to be dwellings in our code. So that's something that we can pass on to code enforcement to look into. And then I believe that answers your questions.
Thank you, Director Justice. Any further questions, Camille? Maybe we've lost her. I'm not sure. Okay.
Stand by, Mr. Mayor. I have to unmute her again.
Okay.
could you hear me now?
Yes. Did you hear the answer?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any further questions?
Just to emphasize it, it's going to be real important, because as change occurs in our village and throughout our locale of Albuquerque, and just within this week, so many houses went up for sale. And if people that are buying in our village, I would hope that these are going to be outlined and to know where we are with this. I know it's, the staff is, you only have so much staff and everybody has their responsibilities, but it's, to keep that, the percentage where it should be, as you allow so many within the village of short-term rentals. If we don't assess what's just people are doing randomly, and I don't know that, and I am certainly not going to ask if they have a permit. And that's all. I think it's just important to some way, somehow assess what is already existing and move forward so that it's going to follow the guidelines of the allowed percentage for short-term rentals.
Okay, thank you, Camille.
You're welcome.
Okay, is there anyone else from the public wishing to speak on this matter? If so, please use the raise your hand button.
Mayor, trustees, there are no more hands raised.
I'm going to call for the question, call for the roll call vote. Trustee Rael,
Yes.
Trustee Lewis,
Yes.
Trustee Pacheco,
Yes.
Trustee Riccobeni is excused. Item E, discussion and approval to adopt ordinance number 278, an ordinance amending Chapter 7, Article 2, Section 7 of the Village of Los Ranchos Animal Control Ordinance on penalty assessment and misdemeanors. Administrator Simon and Fred Radosevich, please remind the board of ordinance number 278.
Thank you, Mayor, trustees. As you may recall from last month, this item seeks to amend the animal control ordinance on penalty assessments. What we're trying to do is to increase the attention to complying with our ordinance. Currently, our penalty assessments are $25 for any infraction. We really don't see that as much of a deterrent. The other thing, we are increasing those penalties to $50. While it's not that big of a change, we hope that it will sensitize people to compliance with our ordinance. We also want to move the most egregious offenses to municipal court. Currently, our animal control officer has to assess $25 penalty assessments on very egregious cases like poisoning, animal abuse cases, and even dog bites. So we are just trying to increase the penalty assessment to match the infraction. Fred Radelsevich may have some other comments on the item.
Go ahead, Fred, if you have something.
Mayor and trustees, I think Ann covered it very well. This
Okay.
is just kind of, I call it some really cleanup language, and allows a couple of issues to go on a penalty assessment, but allows the rest of them to go to municipal court and let the court decide on what the punishment is.
Thank you, Fred. Before we get to discussion or questions from the governing body, if any, I need a motion.
I move approval of ordinance number 278.
Need a second.
Second.
Is there any discussion from the governing body or questions?
Yes, I'd like to. So ordinance 278 is dealing with moving it to municipal court. And then the next resolution is the changing in the fees. Am I understanding that correctly?
Is that correct, Administrator Simon?
I believe so, yes. Fred, can you clarify?
Yeah, Mayor and Trustee Lewis, yes. The resolution is just strictly for the fees.
So 278 is taking out first and second offense and moving it to court hearing. And then then the next one is for, the next resolution we'll vote on is for the fees.
Mayor and Trustee Lewis, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions from the governing body?
I'm a little confused here because the next resolution is rescinding the fees, isn't it?
Mayor and trustees and Fred, please feel free to chime in. What we have in place right now is a 3-tier fee system. If you are caught on the first offense, you get a $25 fee. Then you have to be caught with the same offense 2 other times. And it is very difficult to track down the offenders, to keep track of them. And then there is really still very little penalty. So what we're doing is we're rescinding the 3-tiered system and imposing one $50 penalty.
Not on a separate resolution, is it?
Yes, I think it is, Pablo.
What is the number? I don't have it.
It's Mayor and Trustee Rael, it's the next item.
So the next resolution, Pablo, is they're rescinding the old fees, as I understand it, and instituting the new fees. Is that correct?
Correct.
I believe so.
Yeah, Mayor, Trustee Lewis, Trustee Rao, we have to rescind the previous resolution and then make the new one.
I understand that, but do we have the new resolution here?
It should be, Mayor, Trustee Rael, it should be page 125.
But 125 is part of this same resolution. It's not a different resolution. right? It's on the same.
Not page 125.
Mayor and trustees, trustee Rael, the resolution that you're going to be looking at on the next item, which is F, is on page 130.
Right, I see. But on 125, you're saying is a resolution doing away with the fees?
That resolution is establishing the new fees and rescinding the previous resolution that was already put in place.
And trustee Rael, I misspoke. The ordinance that we are looking at right now is on page 127.
Right. And that number is 278, right?
Right.
Where's the resolution that's setting up the fees?
Trustee Rael, sorry, if I could just interject. So page 127 is an ordinance. This amends our code.
Right.
And this does mention the fees, but on page 130 is the resolution that changes the fees. So one is an ordinance, one is a resolution. They both need to be amended in order to be consistent. Resolution on page 130 rescinds the old resolution and at the same time establishes the new fees.
Okay. I was a little confused, I'm sorry, but
Well, that's okay. Are there any further questions or discussions from the governing body? Okay. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter? If so, please use the raise your hand button.
Mayor, trustees, there are no hands raised.
I'm going to call for the question, call for the roll call vote. Trustee Rael,
yes.
trustee Lewis,
Yes.
trustee Pacheco,
Yes.
trustee Riccobeni is excused. So now we get to item F, discussion and approval of resolution number 2021-06-03, rescinding resolution number 2017-8-1, establishing animal control fees and penalty assessment fines as required by the Village of Los Ranchos Animal Control Ordinance, Chapter 7, Article 2. Administrator Simon and Fred Radosevich, please present the resolution.
Thank you, Mayor and trustee Rael and trustees. So apologies for the confusion and thank you to Director Justice. This is the resolution that now establishes the new fees.
Thank you. Before we get to questions from the governing body or any discussion, I need a motion.
I would make a motion to approve resolution number 2021-06-03.
Need a second.
Second.
Is there any questions or discussion from the governing body? Okay, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter? If so, raise your hand in the raise your hand button.
Mayor, trustees, I have a hand raised from Camille Varos. Stand by.
Okay,
Okay, can you hear me?
yes.
Camille Vados, 427 El Paraíso Road, and just in reference to violations within the animal control ordinance, I would hope, and this is a comment, because I'm a victim of a very severe dog attack in the middle of January 2021. And the owners of the dogs were not cited. They were given a warning and the dogs didn't have rabies shots. And I'm very concerned that, yes, you might have this ordinance and fees increased or fees, but hopefully it's carried out equitably for situations that individuals might be faced, as I have been faced with severe dog attacks, and knowing that the owners of the dogs did not even get cited. A warning and I'm suffering gravely from a dog attack. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to speak on this matter? If so, please use the raise your hand button.
Mayor, trustees, there are no other hands raised.
I'm going to call for the question, call for the roll call vote. Trustee Rael,
Yes.
trustee Lewis,
Yes.
trustee Pacheco,
Yes.
trustee Riccobeni is excused. We now move to item G. Discussion and approval to advertise ordinance number 279, amending application and approval process for home occupation permits to allow home occupations in commercial and mixed-use zones to be approved without public notice, to allow de minimis home occupations to be approved without public notice, amending the conditions of approval for de minimis home occupations. Director Justice, please present the ordinance for advertisement.
Mayor, trustees. There's just a couple things I'd like to explain for some context for these changes. So there's two different types of home occupation licenses in Los Ranchos. There's our home occupation license, and then there's de minimis home occupations. They have very similar requirements, but the main differences are that de minimis home occupations are at a smaller scale than home occupations. This means that they don't allow employees compared to home occupations that allows up to 2 employees. There's no additional business related trips allowed, whereas 10 daily trips per day is considered negligible for home occupations, and no sign is allowed versus a sign for home occupations. So essentially, with a de minimis, you can't really tell that there's a business there on the property. There's no way to tell outside of the residence that a business is occurring. There's no visible traffic impacts or signage, and a home occupation is always within a building. And so with that lack of presence, public notice seems a little bit unnecessary for getting a home occupation, specifically a de minimis home occupation. And we have had an uptick in home occupations that would be considered de minimis, especially due to COVID-19, with more people working from home or choosing to work from their homes and starting businesses with their home address. Many people are wanting to establish a home office or use their home address for like a business license, but they do work elsewhere. And so the public notice requirement, including a 15-day public notice period, can be a deterrent for people to register their business. And with that public notice, there's also the option where if there's adverse comment, it automatically goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission for their next meeting. So that can drag out the approval process for de minimis home occupations specifically. And so just going through these changes, so that's why on page 134, subsection 5A1, I'm proposing to amend that public notice is not required. And then another thing is that on that same page under 5B, you'll notice that subsection 1 says that it should be conducted entirely within the residence or accessory buildings, but then subsection 2 doesn't mention anything about accessory buildings. It actually says that accessory buildings are not allowed. So that is a little bit contradictory. So we're hoping to shore that up by having it consistent with what's allowed with our home occupations, where it's 1,000 square feet of an accessory building. And again, since this would be inside a building with no visible effects, no traffic increases, that kind of thing, there should not really be a difference between 500 square feet of a residence or 1,000 square feet of an accessory building. The other proposed change is on that same page under subsection 4B, 2, about the public notice for permits issued in the C1, BC, or GD zones. And so the reason for that is our public notice requirements go to the adjacent property owners, but especially in mixed use zones that may have higher density with multiple dwellings on a property, they would not necessarily be notified. They are not notified in a public notice, even though they are the most immediately adjacent neighbors. And also with commercial and mixed use zones, these zones, there's uses in these zones and developments in these zones with the understanding that they do allow commercial uses. And especially for mixed use properties, there already are commercial uses on a property. And so with a home occupation that is within the residence, with relatively minimal impact on the increase of commercial activity that would occur, it does not seem prudent to require a public notice to adjacent property owners that are likely to either be commercial or are much further away from the actual home occupation permit than possibly neighbors that are on the same property. And so with that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director Justice. Before we get to questions and discussion from the governing body, I do need a motion.
I move approval to number 279.
For advertisement.
Yeah, approval to advertise ordinance number 279.
Okay, I need a second.
A second.
Okay, is there any discussion or questions from the governing body? Okay, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter? If so, please use the raise your hand button.
Mayor, trustees, I have no hands raised.
I'm going to call for the question, call for the roll call vote. Trustee Rael,
Yes.
Trustee Lewis,
Yes.
Trustee Pacheco,
Yes.
Trustee Riccobeni is excused. So we are now at item 13, trustee informal discussion. Roundtable discussion is informal. The Board of Trustees will take no official vote or other official action. Trustee Rael.
I don't have anything, Mayor.
Thank you. Trustee Lewis.
First, I'd like to thank you and congratulate you, Mayor and Trustee Pacheco. The San Isidro Blessing of the Fields and acequias was awesome. I think I just thank both of you all for spearheading that project and getting it to become hopefully something that we do every year.
And we will, Trustee Lewis, and we're very proud of that event.
You should be.
Okay.
Next, I'd like to welcome Joshua O'Halloran. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Joshua yet, but I've heard a number of outstanding things, and I want to welcome you, Josh, and look forward to meeting you.
Josh, do you have anything to say right now? It's your time.
Mayor and trustees, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for approving me in this position. And it's been a great first week and a half that I've been up here. Met a lot of great residents and people working in the village. And I've had the opportunity to be there for the start of the Explorer Camp and to help plan this Healthy Soils event and a lot of the other things, exciting things that are going on there at the Agri-Nature Center. So I'm excited to be here and excited to have my family come up and join me as we move up here and become part of the community. And I'm grateful for everybody who's made me feel very welcome here.
Well, Joshua, from me and everybody on our staff, we welcome you, and we know that you're going to be a tremendous asset to the village. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
Okay, so Alan Lewis, any further questions or comments?
I would like to comment. I would like to see us, as I understand this refunding of the GO bonds. If it'll save us that kind of money, I think it's something that we need to pursue.
I agree. I do.
Make sure that people understand we didn't have this discussion tonight because we're all planning on some kind of bond issue or throwing something.
Right.
This was really an educational presentation as well as significant, savings for the village if we go forward with this refunding. So
I agree with you.
Move forward on that. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Trustee Pacheco.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to mention that my husband and I this past weekend took a trip to Santa Fe on the Rail Runner. And I think we fail to recognize what a treasure we have with the Rail Runner Center being so close to Los Ranchos.
I agree.
And I would just like to propose that we somehow advertise to our community that treasure that we do have right in front of us. And I encourage the residents to hop aboard, and take a trip to Santa Fe and have dinner and use that as a form of transportation. It truly was a lot of fun for us, and I just want to encourage the residents to do the same, and all of you as well.
Well, that's a great comment, and I happen to agree with you. So we do need to advertise. I like that. Any further questions or comments, Trustee Pacheco?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Riccobene is excused. I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 8:45 p.m. I need a second.
Second.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Welcome, Nan. I see you here. Do you want to say anything right now before we sign off?
Oh, no, I have been here the whole entire meeting.
Oh, okay.
Very efficient, very well done, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Nan. Well, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Right.
Thank you.